evening. My name is Jenny Dumont, and I'm glad to see so many of you out here on this beautiful April evening. Thank you for coming out to our second candidate forum. 2 weeks ago, we were in this room with school board candidates and a candidate for mayor of Gettysburg, and now we've opened it up to larger county officials, people running on the ballot for the judge of court of common pleas, and then also sheriff. So Annie Dowds is to my left. I'm going to give her the mic in just a minute. And I thought that it would be nice to have everybody here and also at home really understand what the role of a judge is. Annie is a professor at Gettysburg College. She's also a lawyer herself and is writing a book that has a whole chapter on judges. So she is certainly the expert. Part of Gettysburg Rising's mission statement is to encourage civic engagement, which we can all do better when we are informed voters, to promote fact-based information, and then to promote policies that best serve the residents of Adams County. So I thank Annie for being here. We have our two candidates on my right for the Judge of Court of Common Pleas. We have Torrin Ecker, who is currently serving as a state representative, and then we have Paul Royer. And so you'll have a chance to vote in the May 20th primaries. So that's coming up in just over a month. I do want to thank community media of South Central PA for broadcasting this so that those who weren't able to be here tonight in the room with us can view it at home, and you can certainly come back to the recording. It's available on their Facebook page. They're really doing a great service to all the voters of Adams County. So they do benefit from support, so you can find out how to donate to their mission and to events like this on their website. In just a moment, I'm going to pass a pink basket around, which would be to help subsidize the cost of renting this room if you're willing or able to chip in. It's not required if you're not able, or, that's perfectly fine. We just do this at all of our events because we don't have any other funding. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Annie.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to speak for a few minutes before we get started with this debate between these two gentlemen who are running in a partisan election for a seat in the Adams County Court of Common Pleas for an initial 10-year term. So let's break that down a little bit. What is a court of common pleas? I'm a professor, so I'm going to pause here, and if anybody wants to share what they think that is, what's a court of common pleas? You have no idea. Good. Okay, that's why I'm here. So a court of common pleas is a court of general jurisdiction. Jurisdiction? What does that mean? Area. Sure. Yep. So jurisdiction. Diction, to speak or to say. Juris, the law. To say what the law is. So that's the job of the judge, is to say what the law is and how it applies to the given facts of the case. The Court of Common Pleas is one of general jurisdiction. If any of you have unfortunately gotten a speeding ticket or otherwise had to appear at a limited jurisdiction court like an MDJ, these courts are above that one. It's the general trial court in our system of justice. So what do they cover? Major crimes, major civil disputes, cases involving children, and they take appeals from the MDJs and the municipal court judges. Across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we have 462 judgeships. 2 are vacant right now, at least 2, because we had the woman convicted last week in Dauphin County, so she's no longer serving. And then we had President Judge Mike George retire. So these gentlemen are running to fill that seat that Judge George vacated. We have, like I said, we have 462. In Adams County, we have 4 seats. So 4 judgeships. The smallest group in jurisdictions in the state have 1. The biggest is 93, which is, of course, Philly. Not surprising anyone. What is a common pleas court? Where does that come from? Anybody have any guess? Common pleas. Yeah, I had no idea either until I started practicing law. So back in 1177-ish, King Henry II back in England, he created a court because he was tired of dealing with commoners and what their problems or their pleas might be. So he created the Court of Common Pleas to establish subordinate judges to run courts on his behalf in the name of the crown to settle disputes among the people like us, not the nobility. Then Magna Carta, anybody? 1215? Magna Carta comes along. Magna Carta comes along and the barons say, you know what? We like this Court of Common Pleas things. We like it so much we're going to expand it. And we want to make it so that not only do we have more of them, but we want to separate out the judiciary from the crown. We don't want executive power over the courts anymore, thus establishing the long-standing tradition that we have in this country today of separation of the judiciary from the executive branch. Pennsylvania created its first Court of Common Pleas in 1722, obviously by the crown, and it is now one of the only 4 places on the planet where you find a Court of Common Pleas, because although it was established in England, nobody in the UK uses it anymore. That got all merged into the Court of the High Bench South. I practiced in Georgia and South Carolina, and I actually served a brief term on the bench in South Carolina in probate court. And so I get the Court of Common Pleas reference, but what I didn't understand is how do we get to the way we select our judges here in Pennsylvania? Because we have partisan elections here. In Georgia, we have nonpartisan elections. So you don't get to declare a political affiliation. In fact, you get in trouble if you declare a political affiliation. In South Carolina, we pick our judges by the Judicial Merit Selection Commission gets together, puts together a slate of 3 names. They give it to the General Assembly, which is the legislature, and then they vote, majority rule. That's how we pick them. In Pennsylvania, we have partisan elections. And at first, when I moved here 15 years ago, I thought that was a bad idea. And I sort of started looking into it, like, why do we do it that way? Well, we did it that way, and we do it that way actually in the tradition of separating the powers. So much like Magna Carta, moving the power away from the executive into the judiciary, the Pennsylvania decided that we wanted to make it so that the people, the will of the people, was responded to, and that's how we came up with elections. So we had our first election for a judge in 1776. Ring any bells? Yeah. First time we were allowed to move away from the king for real. Then we went to gubernatorial appointment in 1790. We went back to election in 1850, and it's been that way ever since. We've added retention elections, which is a thing, but that's other than that, it's kind of stayed the same ever since then. Now, regardless of how you pick your judges, one thing remains abundantly clear. Judges are supposed to be ruthlessly neutral. Politics play no part in your service on the bench. So someone, and you might say, well, you're running on a ticket. It doesn't matter. Once you put on those robes, once you don those black robes, you represent the rule of law, not partisan politics, not personal opinion. That's difficult. And ideology does play a part because the role of a judge is to interpret the law. And of course, ideology is going to influence that interpretation, but it does not dictate that interpretation. It is the job of the judge to remain, again, ruthlessly neutral, but to support and enforce the interest of all parties who appear before the courts. So whether that's plaintiffs and prosecutors, defendants and defense counsel, victims and victim advocates, they need to have the service of the judge helping them maintain a courtroom that is equal, promotes equality and equity, neutrality and fairness. Trial court judges are the cornerstone of our judicial processes, upholding due process and the rule of law. And I can't wait to hear how these 2 gentlemen plan to tell us about how they want to do that. Thank you.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for being here. I appreciate the opportunity to introduce myself, and thank Gettysburg Rising for hosting this and getting to learn a little bit about us as candidates today. And I'm going to start out talking a little bit about my past, my background, and then get into what I'm up to these days. So I grew up, I'm born and raised South Central Pennsylvania. I grew up in the Spring Grove area, married my high school sweetheart. She's sitting right there, Laura. We were from rival school districts, but she went to Southwest. I was from Spring Grove. But nevertheless, I went to college everywhere else. Whenever I went to school, I actually wanted to be a lobbyist. I thought I loved government. I was inspired by a teacher that really got me in loving government, and went to school in George Mason outside D.C. to work on Capitol Hill and I did that for a little bit of time, hoping someday that maybe I would get into the government relations area. ultimately, like all of us, life happens, and Laura and I stayed together, and I didn't want to live in D.C., and ultimately then I decided to go to law school. So I went to law school out of Michigan, Thomas Cooley Law School out of Michigan for 3 years. It's interesting when you tell your wife that you're about to get married, we're going to get married, and I'm moving you to Michigan for 3 years. And it was a fun conversation. But ultimately the plan was always to come back. We always had a plan to come back to Pennsylvania. And when we came back to Pennsylvania, we moved to New Oxford. And I worked in Hanover, and my wife is a teacher, a special education teacher. She was teaching in Bendersville at the time, so New Oxford made perfect sense. And we've been there ever since. And it's a blessing in disguise of when you're trying to look for a home and where to land. It ended up that was the perfect location for us, and it's given us opportunities to serve our community in an awesome area and really grow our family. My grandfather grew up in New Oxford. He's buried in New Oxford Cemetery. I have lots of family that have grown up, and I remember going to Adams County a lot as a kid. But for some reason, we migrated to. I'm bringing us back home, I guess, if you will. So it's a great community. On the professional side, I came home and worked for a law firm in Hanover, Becker and Shawsball, and I worked there for 8 years doing lots of different types of law. We were a general practice firm. I did a ton of family law, a ton of litigation, dealing with construction litigation. I did bankruptcy work, some criminal work. We did lots of adoption work, all kind of everything that kind of came in the door as we took them as they came, and it was rewarding work, and I really learned how to cut my teeth as an attorney. I never thought that I'd run for state rep. I actually thought someday that I always had service in my background. I'm going to take a step back. When I grew up, my father was raised by a single dad, always instilled community is really important to you. It's really important to, and service to your community is really important. And I lived across the street from the volunteer fire company, and at that point, when I turned 14, I realized I wanted to start volunteering across the street. So I got involved as a junior firefighter, started cutting potatoes, and there is a right and wrong way to cut a potato. I learned as a 14-year-old boy. But helping out there is really what started my community and public service interest. And that just kind of grew as I grew up, as I went through school. So when I moved back to the community after law school, I was very involved in my community. I got involved with everything from the Rotary to the Hanover Chamber of Commerce, the Hanover Young Professionals, EBAC, all these different groups, Eastman Community Center, all these types of groups to serve my community. Not only that, being involved in my kids' school and just trying to be very community oriented. So when at that time Representative Will Tallman was retiring, a few folks came and approached me and said, "Hey, Torn, you had an interest in politics in the past. You're politically engaged. You're very community engaged. You should run for office." So that's how that process started, and it's been an extremely rewarding opportunity the last 7 years to serve our community. Obviously, we don't always agree on issues, but I've always approached the job in a very objective way, and my door is always open to solve issues, which I think translates well to running for judge. I have approached every issue, and listen, there's no mistake the legislature is partisan, and we can be. We're allowed to be partisan there. But I still have approached every issue in the legislative capacity in an objective way. My door is always open. And there's a set of principles, obviously, that I run on that I'm elected to, but that doesn't necessarily mean we can't have a conversation. All of the issues that I've championed in Harrisburg that have come into law have been a constituent that's come to me that have gotten widespread bipartisan support, if not unanimous support, because those are the issues that I've been working on. I work on issues that across the aisle. I have an issue, a bullying issue that I'm working with, a Democrat from Luzerne County. I have another issue that I'm working on, a criminal justice reform with a Democrat from Philadelphia. I have worked on issues that bridge that divide because I do approach the job in a very objective way. I've also continued to practice law throughout that period of time. And I think because of that, this puts me in a unique position that I have seen how the law is written, I have practiced the law, and it gives me a perspective that I think will be valuable to the people of Adams County. It's an opportunity for me to still serve. I believe in public service. I never intended to serve a lifetime in the legislature. I don't think that's right. This is an opportunity for me to come home and serve my community, still raise my family. My kids are 10 and we're going to be 10 and 13 here soon. it allows me to be home with my family, but also still serve my community as well. So I would humbly ask that you consider me on election day, but I know there's a lot of questions you want to get to, but ultimately I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for hearing us, and I really look forward to getting into some questions about some of the issues that I think we'll see. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Ecker. Can everyone hear me okay? If at any point I fade in or out, just let me know. Thank you, Professor Dowds. Thank you, Jenny Dumont. Thank you to Gettysburg Rising. Thank you to community media for live streaming this. I'm going to jump around a little bit, so stick with me. Back when Denise and I were getting serious about throwing our hat in the ring, it was probably late summer, early fall. And does anyone remember The Far Side, the comic strip? I'm dating myself a little bit. But I saw this comic strip on The Far Side, and there was this wolf. And this wolf was standing up at a podium in front of a huge flock of sheep. And it was a political thing, right? And the wolf was shouting, "If you elect me, I'll become a vegetarian." And all the sheep were going, "Yay!" And they loved it. They loved it. And now, you all aren't sheep. And by the fact that you're here tonight, you're inquisitive, you're asking questions, you want to know who's going to be your local elected judge. So it's not meant to be analogous. And quite frankly, I don't know what kind of wolf I'd make, and I'm certainly not going to give up eating meat. So maybe it's not the best analogy at all, but that silly little cartoon got me thinking. And it got me thinking really hard, because I knew there would come a time where I have to stand in front of my friends and neighbors, and I didn't want to be the one just telling them what they wanted to hear. I wanted to be the person who was speaking to convictions that I hold. And so it shall be. A couple points that Professor Dowds made that I'd like to expound on before I forget. With regards to the will of the people, it's important to bear in mind it's the will of you. It's the will of the county. The reason the Court of Common Pleas is so close to home, because what we rule on is close to home. And if we get it wrong, we're tearing people's lives up. If we do it right, we're helping sew their lives back together. So it's incredibly compelling, because you're the ones who stuck with us for 10 years, right? It's not someone far away in Harrisburg or 1 or 2 counties over. It's you. So that's something to bear in mind. We were successful in cross-filing with both major political parties. This might seem counterintuitive, because the theme of this campaign from day one has been, this is not about politics. Our partisan politics have no place in that courtroom. And I've said it once, I'll say it 1,000 times. When I'm on the bench, it's about truth, and it's about the law. I don't care what you look like. I don't care who you sleep with. I don't care who you're married to. I don't care who you know, and I certainly don't care how much money you have. It's, are you telling the truth, and what does the law say? It's really that simple, and I suppose that complicated. With regards to this idea of cross-filing, it's complicated, and we get a lot of questions as to why we did it that way, and I hope that makes sense. Because it's my way of saying there's no such thing as a Republican judge. There's no such thing as a Democrat judge. There is a judge. And it's not for half the county or a third of the county. It's for everyone in the county. Now, with regards to the independence Professor Dowd alluded to, and it's contained, I brought the judicial canons with me in case anyone's interested in some late night reading. One of the judicial canons speaks directly to this. This isn't a polite independence from the executive or the legislative or the governor in Harrisburg or the House in Harrisburg, or with all due respect to our county commissioners. This is a fierce independence. We are to do what we think is right based on the evidence we've taken and what the law says. There are no other considerations that come into it. And I don't want to get bogged down in that. So let me tell you a little bit about myself, and then I will tell you about my experience, and then we can open it up for questioning. I live in Cumberland Township with my wife, Denise. She's here tonight. My youngest daughter's here as well. Big sister's up at State College in her freshman year of college. My folks had a place out in Cashtown when I was young. Now, to be fair, they shipped me off to boarding school for reasons we won't get into, but I think you can all imagine. The reasons I'm running for judge are very straightforward. The first is that I love the law. It's not always the most rational thing, and sometimes it's downright confusing, but there is a rhyme to it. There's a reason to it. There's a thread that we can find. And if we do it the right way, and we do it without lucre or malice, we can do it in such a fashion as to help people. It's not always that way. Don't get me wrong. A lot of times it's just wading through the mud. but there is a nobility to it. We have to look for it. The second reason is that Denise and I have been married now since 2003, and when she knew me, the only thing I had to offer her was potential. So part of me is trying to make that right. And lastly, this is a chance to give back. This is a position of service. I see it as a position of, it's almost like a secular monkhood, if you will. The judicial canons require that. It's not only avoiding impropriety, it's avoiding the appearance of impropriety. So maybe I'll be able to fulfill my lifelong dream of becoming a hermit, and an antisocial one at that, but we'll see. With regards to my experience, 2003 was a big year for me. I graduated from Penn State Dickinson and proposed to my wife before graduation. And I graduated with a JD and a certificate in international, foreign, and comparative law, which I have not used at all in the succeeding 20 years. I started my career down in Washington, D.C. and Maryland. I was a trial attorney. I did civil litigation, and I did both sides. I did plaintiff's work. I did defense work for the insurance companies. And after about 7 years, I dare say I was competent. But the point of it was, when I got out of law school in 2003, it was a different time. There was a glut of young lawyers on the market, and they were just pumping them out. And so to get a job was manna from heaven. And in those days, forgive me if this sounds crude, but we ate what we killed. Okay, you had to hustle to get business, and you had to make people happy. It was, if you didn't work, you didn't eat. And it was as Representative Ecker said earlier, it was a heck of a way to cut my teeth. But I had a lot of experience that way. We practiced regularly in 5 to 6 counties all over Maryland. And Maryland's a little different. We have district courts and circuit courts, roughly analogous to what we have here in Pennsylvania. But we had multiple bench trials, probably in the dozens. We had at least a dozen jury trials. And we did some appellate work, and we had a good thing going. The second part of my career I spent up in the Twin Tiers of Pennsylvania and New York. And this is back when fracking was all the rage. Now, I know that can get some negative results and negative vibes, but let me tell you something. It was some of the happiest days of my life, because we were helping to produce clean energy. We were giving money to Side Hill farmers who had no idea they were sitting on millions of dollars worth of royalties. And it was, my children were young, everyone was happy and healthy. It was a beautiful time and an absolutely gorgeous part of the country in Western New York. So like my parents before me, eventually I wanted to be closer to my folks. And there's been lawyers in this part of the world since 1718. So we go way back, and if there's an ancestral homeland, I suppose this is it. And so we moved back in 2015, 2016, and John Mooney gave me a leg up and got me started in general practice. He was, like I said, it was a general practice, and I knew nothing about criminal defense, nothing. And in my mind, unless you can tell somebody accused of a crime, unless you can help them work backwards from what a jury's going to look like and how a jury's going to operate, then your opinion is worthless. You're not helping that person at all. You're trying to sell them a bill of goods. You're convincing them to take a plea, maybe a plea they shouldn't take. So unless you can work backwards from that, you're not doing a service to your client. And I became obsessed with this idea of giving valid, meritorious advice to people who were in really tough spots. And we can talk about law enforcement later and my views on that. And I don't mean to say that with any kind of disparagement. I'm friends with a lot of these guys. They've given me their endorsement. The locals have anyway. But we live in a very policed society. And we can talk about that to the finer points later before I get sidetracked. But what I'm getting at is I was lucky enough to, I think of it as almost like a 2.5 year sabbatical when I went to work for Kristen Rice at the Public Defender's Office. And that's when I really started to see the intricacies of the court and how they work. And the judges, the tip staff, the clerks, the DAs, the PDs, that natural daily grind that all these folks go through every day and that they do for decades. You know Robbie Bain, he's been at it forever. And there's an intimacy to it, and there's a structure to it, and there's a flow to it. That was the experience that really helped me to understand that. And quite frankly, I would encourage any young person coming out of law school to be a DA or to work as a PD. In a lot of ways, it's a yin-yang type relationship. I know that might not make any sense, but there is a give and take to it. And it is a fantastic way to learn how the judiciary works. It's a fantastic way to talk with people who have real concerns in their life. And it's a great way to learn the rules of evidence, quite frankly. And let's talk a little bit about that. The role of judge is at the end of the day, it's a hyper-technical position. We like to wax poetic about the search for truth and the search for justice, and that we have this kind of almost like alchemy in terms of arriving at justice. That's part of it. Temperament is huge. That's all very important. But what I'm here to tell you also is that it's a big job in terms of keeping the dockets moving, keeping things in order, getting people's names spelled right, okay? Coming to rulings in a prompt fashion. Because if we get it wrong, guess what? They're filing an appeal. And those appeals take months. We're waiting on the Superior Court. In the meantime, those people I talked about earlier, the parties are in limbo, and their lives are unsettled. We have got to get it right. It is not something to play with. It is not something you just pick up and run with. So after working with Attorney Rice, who in my humble estimation is still probably one of the best lawyers in the county, I was back into private practice, and we've been off and running. We still do a fair amount of court-appointed work. In Adams County, the court is constantly in search of attorneys willing to take cases at a reduced hourly rate. You see it a lot in criminal defense. We see it a lot in dependency court. And for those of you who don't know what that is, dependency court is when kids are in trouble and they're not in good situations, and children and youth have to step in. So long story short, we are in a constant need of attorneys willing to serve, okay? And let me tell you something, at the risk of sounding combative, there is no lawyer in Adams County who's too good or too important not to take those cases. The court needs it. And I feel strongly that we live in a country where either everybody gets a lawyer or nobody gets a lawyer. That's how it's supposed to work. That's what the Sixth Amendment's there for. So once again, anyone who maybe you have kids or friends or young folks aspiring to go to law school, there are opportunities for service. They won't pay your loans off, but there are opportunities for service. So I don't want to belabor my experience, but because quite frankly, I'd rather talk about a lot of different things in my experience, but it's a very important thing in this race, and I think it's something that we all need to be well informed about. And I think the best way for me to do that is, instead of making vague allusions, I'm going to tell you about my last 2 weeks. On Monday, I was in front of Judge Campbell for a plea for a criminal matter, okay? And I won't get into the details of it, but long story short, my client mistakenly discharged a firearm into his floor. Okay, these things happen, you understand. Earlier this week, I was in front of Judge Wagner for a suppression hearing with a fascinating argument concerning the issuance of a warrant and how far that warrant extended, and whether or not the police had probable cause to search a vehicle that was outside of that coverage of the warrant. These are the things. These are the nuts and bolts of the practice of law. And multiple cases in front of Judge Simpson in dependency court. Dependency court will do 12 in a day. So 6 clients in front of her for that. I had a PFA on Wednesday in front of Judge George, which we were fortunate enough to resolve. And I also had the unique experience of, I had a support matter in front of Judge Kuhn. And maybe some of you know Judge Kuhn, he's been around a long time. And we kind of, I guess we overlapped a little bit, but I never had the privilege of appearing in his courtroom. So that was a first for me, because he's serving part-time until we can get somebody else elected, as well as Judge George's as well. And then last Friday was litigation of a custody dispute in front of Judge Simpson. It was a matter of standing. And as I'm sure some of you are aware, the laws on custody have changed somewhat in recent years, because it's the idea of extending standing or the right to be in a case to grandparents. The way our society has developed is we are seeing a lot of grandparents having to step into that role of parent. We also always know that the right to raise our children as we see fit is a constitutional right in this country. So where do we draw that line? How do we let the grandparents, when do we let the grandparents step in? These are very important issues, especially when those folks don't agree. So I hope that helps a little bit. I didn't want to get too bogged down in the experience. And like I said, with all due respect to Representative Ecker, in terms of the level of experience it takes to succeed as a Court of Common Pleas judge, I humbly submit that I'm the only candidate in the race who has that experience. I've spoken briefly about my experience. I've told you a little bit about my family. They've been incredibly supportive. I'm doing my best to keep my kids out of it. They're old enough to have their own lives, quite frankly. They don't need to get bogged down in this stuff. So in short, I thank you for your time. I look forward to questions, and I look forward to trying to answer them.
And I want to thank both of you for taking the time to come here, but also for running for this important position within our county, you know, where you will serve people from a variety of backgrounds and a variety of circumstances. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that a judge in Adams County is the most glamorous job that a lawyer could have. You know, so I think that really speaks to what you want to do with your education and experience by serving the people in this community right here. So thank you. You know, I also want to point out that we are very fortunate to have a choice on the ballot. You know, often in smaller elections, particularly in off years, it's difficult to find people to fill different roles. So I think we're very fortunate that we have not just one person, but two who are willing to step up and put the effort into running for office. With that, unless either of you have any remarks, I'm happy to give you a few more times. We can turn it to the audience for Q&A, and I would ask if you're able to come up and use the mic. That way our listeners at home can hear your question. Was there anything either of you wanted to add, or should we open it up to questions? Okay, wonderful. Yeah.
Do my best. And this question would be addressed to both of you, and I'd like your perspective. And it has to do with incarceration of an individual and the sometimes ability or inability to pay the fines without being reincarcerated. For example, if one commits a crime and they should pay whatever is due, whether it be being incarcerated or a fine, but sometimes it happens they can't pay the full fine, so they're put in jail. And when they're in jail, they lose their job. And then when they come out, because they can't pay the fine, it's added to it. So I'm asking you, what would you do to make it possible for those individuals to pay the fines or jail or whatever's due, and also then be able to do it in a reasonable way? So I'll just open it up to both of you.
Thank you for that question. And you know, I think this is where discretion comes in, right? This is where judges have discretion to make these judgment calls. Obviously, there's a set of laws you need to follow, and sometimes there's procedure that you need to follow as it deals with this, and sometimes it's a policy discussion, and we have that sometimes in Harrisburg. But when you have discretion on those types of issues, where you're deciding on, you know, what type of a punishment or what type of sentencing you're going to initiate, or if someone's maybe made a mistake, they screwed up. People make mistakes. throwing the book at somebody isn't going to necessarily fix it. I believe in criminal justice reform. I do believe that people make mistakes and can rehabilitate from them, but you got to give them opportunities to do that. And sometimes people are going to make mistakes, and I think if there's opportunities to, I think the most important thing somebody has is a job, and it's the most valuable thing is to earn a living. And if you're putting someone in a position to not earn a living, then how are they going to pay the fine? How, they're going to put themselves in a situation that is not going to improve themselves. Because at the end of the day, it's about rehabilitating folks so that recidivism and things go down. We want that to go down. We don't want people in prisons. We want to see people back on the right path. So I think finding opportunities as a judge to give those second chances, to give those opportunities to folks that truly deserve them, is an opportunity that I would look for.
We don't have debtor's prison in Pennsylvania, and that's a good thing. What we do have is contempt court. So when folks fall behind on their fines or court costs, it is entirely possible they end up in jail. But so let's talk a little bit about that. But let's talk about how they got there in the first place. This might sound a little bit overly dramatic. Maybe you've heard the term war on the poor. Okay, it's a real thing in the sense that it's a cycle. It's a cycle that's really hard to get out of, especially when you live in a rural county. You lose your driver's license, you can't get to work. You can't get to work, you can't pay your mortgage. You can't pay your mortgage, your significant other's out the door. It is a spiral, okay? Now, fortunately, in this county, what we've seen is we've seen progress towards this idea of work release. Okay, before COVID, work release was, I'm not going to say it was guaranteed, but it was something we utilized every chance we got. And Attorney Ziegler can tell you this, work release is the second best option. If somebody messes up and they take responsibility or they're convicted in front of a jury and they're off to prison, work release enables people to maintain their employment. The prison has done a nice job. Warden Heilman is out there. They are doing what's now called the Norwegian model. It's a much more conducive model to giving restrictive confinement, but at the same time allowing people to keep their lives together, if that makes sense. Now, you ask a really hard question. What am I going to do on the bench when somebody is repeatedly in front of me and hasn't paid their fines? And I am incredibly reluctant to answer that question, and here's why. I think that I'm ethically prohibited from doing that. I can't tell you what I'm going to do when I'm on the bench with regards to particular matters. I think it would, if you read the judicial candidate, it almost comes across as a promise. I will say this: we're going to be fair. I don't like seeing people get ripped off. I don't like seeing people suffer. And if there's a way to avoid that, we're going to do it. But it's going to be within the confines of the law. Oh, and before I forget, another way to avoid getting people into jail in the first place, and this is something that Adams County is a little bit behind on, is a couple things. Drug court, mental health court, veterans court, alternative ways to seek retribution and bring people back into society that don't involve incarceration in the first place, okay? Going to jail for a marijuana DUI does not make any sense. And that is it just doesn't make any sense. And as a society, we're going to have that conversation at some point because all the states around us have had it. A lot of states in the union have had it. And so we have to start having these conversations in a sophisticated and hopefully a mature fashion. As a judge, can we really get into the fixing that problem? No. Honestly, it's something that the legislature has to do, and I would urge them to get on it.
Yeah. So the question is anyone else running? And yeah, we would be the two candidates running, unless someone's come with a write-in campaign that we don't know about. We would be the only two. Yeah. Correct. There's one seat to fill. Yes, ma'am.
So kind of going off what you were saying with the whole mental health court side like that. So I'm a strong advocate for mental health and everything, especially with kids, but for everybody. So I'm just curious, like, how much background do you guys have in the field itself? Not necessarily schooling, because I don't really do so much. Like, how involved are you in the whole mental health aspect? Because I think that's a big thing that needs to be more talked about.
Sure. I'm not a mental health professional for sure, but I've worked. Again, I'll go back to working with clients. And there's a lot of times where folks come to you, dealing with issues, whether it's somebody who has a bankruptcy that's in a very stressful part of their life and trying to figure out how to get out of that situation, and just being there to listen to them. Or someone who's in a divorce situation that's extremely traumatic, and they're feeling the stress of a divorce, and there's anger, there's tears, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that, and being the counselor, being there to listen is really, really important. I think one of our most important jobs at times is to listen to our clients and listen to them tell their story and work through those problems. There's a lot of issues that folks typically, when you're going to see a lawyer, usually something in your life is probably turned upside down. There's a few things that, maybe adoption's a happy thing usually, but a lot of times when you're talking estate planning, but when you're talking to a lawyer, there's probably some conflict in your life. So we as practitioners need to understand that and be that compassionate person. I've dealt with clients that are on the verge of very serious mental health issues, suicide. We've had that, and you give them the resources to put them in a position so they don't do something that is going to be devastating. Not only regret, but their families are going to regret. So I've been in those situations where we give them the resources, we make sure they get the help that they need. Or maybe it's a child that's in a mental health situation because of a custody matter. It's giving those kids resources, is really important. So from that perspective, that's been my experience. I've on the other side of it is also just, dealing in the legislative side of things is working on those types of issues and meeting with mental health professionals and hearing those issues, working on school bullying, things like that are in our community that people come and talk to me about. So having that background, that experience as well, is understanding what are those issues, talking to superintendents and seeing what those behaviors are in schools and those types of things, because there's a lot of more behaviors now that are happening in schools. So understanding those issues, I have a perspective, I think, as well, as at least to, knowing what those are. Again, I'm not the medical care professional. I'm not the person that's going to give someone advice, but my role, I think, is to point them in the right direction. So thank you.
I'm not going to comment on any specific clients, but I will try to give a general overview of my experience dealing with mental health in the legal context. First of all, how did we get here? What we're seeing a lot of these days is our prisons are being asked to serve as mental health wards. And it is not a good fit. And our corrections officers are some of the most patient, hardest working people I've ever met. And Lord knows they've kept me from getting beat up out there a couple times. But what I'm getting at is they are there to keep the peace in the prison. They are not there as trained mental health providers. So we are asking them to do a job that is beyond their purview, beyond their training. And it's a problem. Now, in the legal world, legal competency is a term of art. And we are constantly coming into contact with folks who might have a diagnosis that we are unaware of. And it is our job to determine whether or not they meet that threshold of legal competency. They are the ones who make the decisions with regards to their cases, their lives. We can't make them for them. And this idea of competency, the idea of being able to contribute to your own defense or contribute to your own case, that is the legal standard that we must keep our eyes on. With regards to my personal experience, we work closely with MHIDD. They are the constant source out at the prison and also all over Adams County. Sadly, we see them in dependency court quite a bit too, and juvenile court. Department of Probation Services likewise has designated officers who are specific to clients or folks on probation with mental health concerns. Justice Works is another great organization that dedicates time to that. Furthermore, we're always working with experts. Dr. Van Essen is a local psychologist who we've used a number of times for various reasons. Dr. DiTilio outside of Philadelphia is another fantastic resource in this field. SCI Torrance is the only facility in the state prison system that is dedicated to mental health treatment. The waiting list to get in there is ridiculously long. In the meantime, you can have someone who is suffering from a debilitating mental illness sitting out at Adams County Prison. It's not a tenable situation. And what that means is, as counsel for those individuals, we got to be on it. We got to be looking for alternatives. We got to be looking for ways to push these things forward. We can't wait for arraignment. We can't wait for plea day. We can't wait for trial. We got to find ways to speed this up, because in the interim, those folks are in a bad way. I think that hits it all. Thank you for the question.
So Attorney Royer, you touched on these treatment courts and whatnot, and Attorney Hecker. You know, we've seen the success out in York County, so we've seen it work in a neighboring county. Obviously, hasn't made its way to Adams County yet. If you're elected and take the bench, what steps would you take to try and get it implemented in Adams County, and what have you seen as possibilities, you know, as we move forward?
Yeah, and I appreciate the question. Thank you, Attorney Ziegler. This is something that I've actually worked on the legislative side. We've had people reach out about how Adams County does not have, especially like a veterans court, which is kind of the most, I think, the easiest pathway, or even, you know, a drug court that have been extremely successful. I represent parts of Cumberland County. There's an opioid court up there that has an incredible success rate. I think it's, oops, turn it off. It's an incredible opportunity to get people in a deferment kind of way to get them the help that they need. You know, veterans court, I think you start with something like a veterans court, and you work up to build these programs out. Judges have discretion to implement. I met with Judge George to talk about this a number of months ago with some veterans groups that were really advocating for this, that really like the York program. And you know, a lot of I think some at that time, Judge George was of the mindset that he already has the discretion to do some of these things, which is true. But I think just having these programs out there that people understand and can take advantage of is an opportunity to really help folks get, when they make a mistake. We've all made mistakes. I've definitely made my mistakes. Giving people an opportunity, a pathway to really become a more productive citizen in society.
Attorney Ziegler, thank you for the ridiculously difficult question. The simple truth of it is Adams County is a beautiful place to live, but it's also a place of limited resources. And advocating for the additional funds that would be required to start said courts has been an uphill battle. So as a sitting judge, what would I do specifically to make that happen? Well, I can agitate. I can talk to people, but in terms of pulling purse strings, that's outside of my purview. Will I do what I can? Absolutely. Am I going to make empty promises? Absolutely not.
The first part of my question to Representative Ecker, on June 25th, 2024, what was your participation when Officer Dunn and Sergeant Donald came to the Capitol to speak to the legislature, and the Republicans turned their back on them, and booed? I think that shows complete, total disrespect to those who are taking. We have a constable here And then if both of you could comment on what's going on with the pardoning of the insurrectionists and now talk of restitution to them.
So I'll address the first issue just because I think I'm happy to do that. But we can't comment specifically on political issues like that. I mean, it really is a nonpartisan issue. The day you're talking about, I was not on the House floor. I found that to be upsetting. Just from perspective, it was not all of the House members House Republicans that walked off the floor. There was a couple of them. Obviously, it got played that there was a lot. I was upset with the fact they did that. I would never have done that. I was not on the House floor at that time. There's meetings always going on. We're not always on the floor all the time for especially the welcoming and stuff. I was not there, so I can't. I don't know exactly what happened. But I would not have been someone that would walk off the floor. There's people that come on the floor all the time. It wouldn't have been something. As far as the pardoning of what happened on January 6th, I can't speak to that. I mean, that's how we would feel about that or how we rule about that. That's not our rule as judges as Attorney Royer put out earlier. We can't tell you how that is. It's a fact. It's a fact by fact case. If someone committed a crime, obviously then that crime has been decided. Pardoning is not a judicial function. It is an executive function. Ultimately, that's not our role to make those decisions. So I'm going to punt on that issue because we have to in this rule.
Ma'am, could you clarify which question you'd like me to answer?
Just your thoughts on the pardoning and the restitution. Again, I didn't know if it would be allowed, but it seems like court and legislature and executive are all getting, the lines are all getting smudged right now.
Yeah, that's powerful stuff. And the separation of powers, as Professor Dowds alluded to, is the bedrock of our society. And the reason it is that way is because it's created this beautiful, enduring tension. It's supposed to work that way. The branches of government are supposed to push back on one another. There's supposed to be these disagreements. And the question you ask is a good one, and I think it's all on our minds. And if I'm being totally honest, I was up really late last night because I knew someone was going to ask something like that. and unfortunately, after scrolling through multiple media posts, the decision I came to is, long story short, I haven't read the judicial opinions. And I'm a defense attorney, so anytime I hear I hear somebody got a pardon, my ears perk up because that's typically good news. And now it's this idea of a national issue where I don't know the facts of the case. I don't know how long these folks were detained. I don't know what these individuals were accused of doing as to this mass group of insurrectionists. So consider this an artful dodge. I hope you don't consider it too cowardly on my part. But without really digging into the facts of each case, I'm incredibly reluctant to give an opinion. Who's next? Anyone?
Thank you both for being here. I am not a legal expert. I have no legal expertise, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that. So it's always a challenge for regular people like me to evaluate candidates like you. So we're really not qualified to judge your judging, to judge whether you're doing a good job. So what advice do you have for regular voters? What do you think they should pay attention to about judge candidates that they may otherwise overlook?
Yeah, that's a good question because I guess the initial reaction is to tell you to go with your gut. That's probably not the best advice because it is an important position and there has to be some objectivity to it. There has to be some criteria that we meet. And quite frankly, sir, that's why I spent so much time on my experience. And it's not meant to be braggadocious. It's this idea of, are we qualified to do the job? And Look, I have nothing against transactional attorneys. I don't. They serve a very valuable purpose in our society. But as Clarence Darrow said, real lawyers try cases, and cases are tried in front of juries. And I say that with no disrespect, but that's where the rubber hits the road. And when you're a sitting judge presiding over attorneys who think they're hot stuff, and individual clients who are incredibly upset and under a lot of emotional strain, you're being asked to make determinations on fine points of law of objections like that. You've got to get it right. And that's not something you can just imagine yourself into. You have to have the experience to be able to do that. And that's when you just have a chance of getting it right. It's an incredibly tough position. It's a grind. And if you're asking how do you evaluate someone whether or not they're able to do the grind, I think you have to ask yourself, well, have they done that grind in the past?
Yeah, that's a really good question, right? And there's a lot of positions out there that we don't know. Keep doing that. As we're trying to evaluate candidates on how we're voting for them, especially for these roles like this, these countywide roles. And I think experience matters for sure. And I think experience is something as well. But it's also temperament. It's also how people are going to decide cases. Because at the end of the day, especially the fact this is going to be likely a family court judge position, is that this is going to be people that have to have some compassion, that understand how to deal with family law issues, that understand, how to deal with people. There is temperament absolutely involved. How you work with people, how you care about your community, how you've interacted, your experiences. I think all of those things matter. And I think you got to educate yourself, right? I mean, folks need to take the time to evaluate both of us. And we both have websites. We both have literature. There's ways to educate yourself for the things that you think are important to you when you're a voter. And if maybe you think experience is more important, but maybe, when it comes down to deciding these issues, temperament and how you decide these issues is also extremely important to voters, because when we're talking about a custody case, it's a set law. It's a set factors that you run through. It's evaluating people's arguments, evaluating the witnesses, how you deal with people, how you can interact with folks. It is set. It's driven by procedure and understanding that. So if you have experience with that, you could have tried 1,000 cases, but if you tried 100 cases dealing with that, you know the process. So when you get down to this, it's about temperament and how well you can work through issues and decide facts. Because at the end of the day, as Professor Dowd said, is that it is about, this is the trial court, this is where the facts, this is where the record gets developed. It's the most important court. You are the fact finder in a lot of these situations. The judge, in most situations, a jury is typically not involved in a lot of cases unless you're dealing with a criminal course. The judge is the one who's the fact finder. So ultimately, that's the person making the decision. So their ultimate role in the courtroom is to decide the facts. And someone's ability to get to the facts, I think, is also a strength that you need to look at when you're looking to select a judge. So thanks.
Okay, and I think that's going to have to conclude this portion of the event to leave 30 minutes for we have a representative from one of the people running for sheriff's office and the other is here himself. But let's again thank these gentlemen. And before I turn over to the next set of people, would you mind sharing your website information or where people could further their education on your candidacies?
If you could find me at www.eckerforjudge.com.
The internet?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Royer for Judge, I believe. And we have literature we're happy to share as well.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so now we have Daniel Hollenbaugh, who is reading a statement prepared by one of the candidates, Josh Fitting. So he will come up and you can take that mic, you can stand. He'll read that. He will not be answering questions on behalf of the candidate. but he can perhaps point you towards his social media or website where you can follow up with those questions. And then John Wega will come up here, who is the other candidate for sheriff of Adams County. There was a third candidate that did make it through the process to appear on the ballot, Kevin Miller, but my understanding is that he has withdrawn his candidacy, so there's a choice between two.
Good evening, everybody. If you don't mind, I'll sit down. I'm not much of a stander anyway. My name's Daniel Hollenbaugh. I have a prepared statement that I'm here to read on behalf of Josh Fitting. So first off, Josh really did want to be here this evening. He did have a prior commitment that he could not move. He sends his best, and he asked me to share a bit on his background, his vision for the sheriff's office, and why he's the right choice for the position of sheriff in Adams County. I've had the privilege of working alongside Josh and seeing his dedication up close. Whether it's showing up early for a coordinated warrant service, helping organized events in the community, or stepping up for a colleague in a pinch, Josh is the guy who never needs to be asked twice. He's professional, he's reliable, and he always puts the mission first. Let me give you a quick snapshot of who Josh Fitting is. Josh is a full-time Pennsylvania State Constable with over 18 years of combined service in law enforcement and in the United States Army Reserves, where he currently serves as a Master Sergeant E8 with a lot of leadership position there. He's not just wearing two uniforms, he's carrying two heavy responsibilities. He's protecting our communities and preparing for emergencies at the state level. Josh has done it all: judicial services, courtroom security, prisoner transports, warrant executions, you name it. And he doesn't do the job for a title or for a paycheck. He does it because he genuinely cares about keeping people safe and raising the standards for how that job gets done. He's also been a boots on the ground and community programs kind of guy. He helps with the Bigelow Police Department's drug disposal events. He works with the Adams County Youth Coalition, and he makes time to support initiatives that keeps our children safe and our neighborhoods strong. What sets Josh apart is his vision for the sheriff's office. So Josh is running to modernize the office, to strengthen relationships with the local police departments, to improve internal communication, ensure officers are getting the affordable, high-quality training they deserve. He's committed to raising operational standards and offering competitive salaries that help us recruit and retain the best in the field. And here's something I think that speaks volumes. Josh has put in hundreds of hours of training on his own time at no cost to the taxpayers because he believes in being ready for anything. That's the kind of leadership that we need. Josh lives in Gardner's with his wife Jessica and their son. He's not just running for office, he's raising a family right here in the community that he's sworn to protect. And I'll close with this. There are a lot of people who want to lead. There are far fewer who truly have earned it. Josh Fitting has earned it through service, sacrifice, and unshakable commitment to Adams County. On behalf of Josh, thank you, and we hope to earn your support in this election.
We serve in courts, so basically we serve warrants, transport prisoners, courtroom security service, petitions, independent civil process. Long story short, Josh does the day-to-day job that current sheriff's office does. The only difference is that sheriff's deputies and sheriffs do that at the court of common pleas level, whereas constables is an actual.
Okay, come on up, and this is John Wega, who's now going to talk about, and then we'll have until about 8:30 if there are any questions. Yes, because we've got people listening at home.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you. Well, thank you for having me here tonight. And I have never run for office, but I've done a lot of different things. But I'm really finding a lot of positivity. I'm getting able to reconnect with a lot of people I haven't perhaps seen or talked to for a while, and I'm connecting with a lot of new people. Maybe some of those are you all tonight. So I really appreciate the opportunity and reaching out to me to be a part of this. And talking about, I'm John Wega. I'm running for the office of Sheriff of Adams County. And I would be remiss tonight if I didn't really start with the sobriety of the job to protect the people of our community. And today's tragedy at Florida State University is just too much of a, maybe too common of a reminder that we're having today. And people I talk to, many people I talk to say we thought it would never happen here. And we recently had a tragedy in York where it did happen here. And that was some of the same things of people that I talked to over there. And a sheriff deputy from York County was wounded in that incident over there. So it's something we need to think. There were two at this point being reported killed and 6 injured. And it's something we need to remember, and I think really bring into light or into perspective the sobriety of what we're doing to hire someone to replace Sheriff James Mueller to be the sheriff of Adams County. Because sometimes elections can be personalities, and sometimes almost feels like high school politics, want to be the president of the class and promise everyone like a new pencil with an eraser. But hiring a sheriff really is a serious job, and it's something that if everything goes right, you may never even think about the sheriff or what he does or his deputies. Maybe there's something in the newspaper. It's usually positive, something like that. But when something happens, you want someone to be able to trust. You want a mature person that can make good decisions. You want a person that has experience, not just experiences, but the appropriate experience to be able to make decisions and to lead a team of people that can be ready for anything. Because really, it can be any time, any place, anywhere. And I thought that was important to kind of set the stage of doing that. And we do have a great law enforcement community in the area, and the sheriff is just one part of that. And that's the nature of the county being rural and that type of thing. And it is something to think about. Now, one thing when you think about trying to hire someone for a job, if you're working at a company, of course, you know what the company does, and you know what expectations would be for the person that you want to hire. So something I found, and I do some teaching at the high school for the criminal justice program, is what do you actually think a sheriff office does? I mean, we get our impression of things usually from TV, movies, and over time the sheriff role has been maybe looked at like Barney Fife and Mayberry, or maybe Jackie Gleason and Cannonball Run or something like that. And some of those aren't the most favorable representations of a sheriff. But you do have some people like a Grady Judd or someone like that in Florida that's a professional, been in business for 50 years and does a lot to protect the people of his county in Florida. So I think we'll talk about that, but first I want to at least introduce myself. I may know some of you may have heard me. I actually taught yoga in this room here for the Y before COVID hit. So I've done a lot of different things, but my name is John Wega, and I'm running for the office of sheriff. My family and I lived in Adams County for 23 years, where my wife Susan of 37 years raised our family. We have 4 grown children and 4 grandchildren. We are a law enforcement family. My 2 sons are both Allentown police officers. They're very active there. They're on the SWAT team. They're detectives. They're instructors at the police academy there, and they are in the thick of the protection of people there. My 2 grown daughters, one works for the Commonwealth and one manages a restaurant, so we're very proud of them. And my experience is kind of broad, and I've done a lot of different things, but I think my diversity of experience gives me the strength and the fabric to make good decisions on things. See, the sheriff office isn't just what you see on TV where people are out kicking in doors and locking people up. You may watch Cops, and that's been another TV impression that people get of law enforcement, but it's really not much like that. There may be instances like that in an emergency, but it's not an everyday happening, especially in Adams County. I'm thankful for that. But the sheriff office it's really much of a business operation. We have 20 staff. We have 16 sworn deputies, including the sheriff and the supervisors. We also have 4 administrative staff, and they do a lot of work to really keep the office running. We issue 4,000 license to carry permits for county residents and out-of-state residents. There's been a big influx of Maryland residents coming here to get that, since we are a border town. We also process the sheriff's sales for the mortgage foreclosures. That's a big operation. A lot of money travels through and goes through that, and people rely on the office to do that well and do it accurately and serve the people involved in those situations. We also do process the civil paperwork from the court. It's a big operation to do that for attorneys filing civil paperwork and also orders coming down from the court, and we will serve those out to people. And that is a legal process. We're a representative of the court, and we're basically documenting, verifying that we, yes, did serve this paper to X person on such and such of a date. So it does help the system go through on that. As far as the operations of the court deputies, about 60 to 70% of what we do is serving the court by providing security in the courtroom. We have a security team in Adams County that actually works the front door with the metal detectors and protects the building in and of itself. So that would be the large majority of the courts. We've recently faced some challenges on that because the county, in its working, we've added a second courthouse building. That's the Human Services building on Boyd School Road. So that houses a lot of departments over there, but it does hold the central courts, and it does house 2 magistrate judges and various other things for like the youth, children and youth, and some of the dependency courts that you heard about earlier. So we do staff that as far as protection. We do have holding cells to bring inmates in there to hold them for the courts. So that's a large part of what the deputy's day looks like. What else do? We do transport prisoners. We transport them from the jail to the courthouse to go to their hearings, meet with their attorneys, that type of thing. But we also do extraditions. That's going to be someone that gets arrested somewhere outside of Adams County, and we will go and pick those people up on an extradition up to about 300 miles. Otherwise, we'll pay a transport company to transport those people, and that could be from anywhere across the country. And that is a lot of people, but it also is a big expenditure that's held against our budget for the sheriff office. And part of the civil process that we do, which is very important to me, I've been on the domestic task force for 6 years here at Adams County, and a very important job that we do. We take it very seriously, and it is really utmost of keeping people safe, and that is the PFA services. That's protection from abuse. So this would be in a case where domestic violence or someone that's an intimate partner or blood relative has some type of threat to them. They will come before the judge and issue a PFA, which would restrict their ability. Some states will call it a restraining order, no contact order. They also can involve evicting the person from the house, so the person is still, the plaintiff or the victim would still be able to have a place to live. And if there are deemed so by the judge or the courts, weapons could be ordered to be relinquished. So that becomes a very risky type of, high-risk type of situation if the case warrants it. You have a very emotionally charged situation, and we do that to keep everyone safe, but that is a very important job of what we do at the sheriff office. It is a priority, and we're the primary servers of those. We also serve warrants. Now, most of our warrants are served actually in the courthouse, because one thing I did was develop a system actually through the CPCMS, the Common Pleas Court Management System. I was the first deputy in the state to go to a training to learn how to use that system and electronically be able to search all the participants in court for warrants. So they're coming to us, we can serve it in a much of a safer fashion, and we can avoid those situations of being out on the street somewhere and have to send someone to jail. We have mechanisms at the sheriff office. We can help people get their warrants resolved without having to go to jail, and that is something that we're proud of, but also we are also able to, I would say, cast a net for people that might have more serious criminal warrants outside of the county, outside the state, maybe somewhere else in the country. So this is a very effective job to keep those situations that you might see from being more dangerous. We do actually have warrant service in the field. All of our deputies are trained to do that. We typically try to keep 2 deputies assigned to doing the warrants out in the field and out in the community. And that is probably about 5 to 10% of the operation of the courts, of our sheriff office overall. So you may have seen the Cops TV show, but that's not really reality, as you would talk to the attorneys here about. The courtrooms aren't like the fancy judge things that you see on TV all the time with the cases and all that kind of thing. It's a lot of rigor and a lot of taking care of people. Now, that's a little bit about the job itself, and I hope that helps you understand a little bit more about the operations of the sheriff office. Now, being that we are countywide jurisdiction and the sheriff is an elected official, he reports to you, the people. That's a very important thing. There's a distinction between the sheriff and the police, because police are basically working for their township, their borough, and report to a council or a board of supervisors. And the sheriff reports directly to the people. And that actually is something that's very important. And it's one of the things I'm working on doing, is giving you, the people, a seat at the table with the sheriff. What are your concerns? I personally keep an advisory board of people, some very highly qualified people I'm blessed to know. But I currently am forming an advisory panel of people for the sheriff office. I think it's twofold. One, keep my ear to the ground and know what concerns and issues that you may be having. The other thing is, there are so many people in Adams County with such a great amount of experience. Myself or anyone else or the whole sheriff office, we can't know everything or be everything or do everything. We're not superheroes. But there are so many people in Adams County, especially in the retired community, that are just experts in so many fields. Some are retired military, some are retired Secret Service, some are pastors, people that have their ear to the ground working with people. Some are mental health people that know more about the mental health aspects. And some are just regular people. One of my friends is the manager of the McDonald's. He's from Philadelphia, and I've asked him to be on my advisory board. And we need to have representation from basically all walks of life to be on a panel, so we can hear what's important and have ideas and suggestions on what can be done. Now, some of the expertise that's out there might help us to do active shooter response for a school. People that have decades of training on how to respond and clear buildings and do that safely. We need to capitalize on that. People are willing to do it and provide us training and assistance and guidance on doing that type of thing. And I think that that's going to be a great aspect of having a seat at the table for people to be a part of the sheriff office and the operations of what we do. And I think it's going to benefit both of us. And that's about the sheriff office. Now, what about myself? In this interview, why should you hire me to be the sheriff? Well, I do have a diverse background, which I think strengthens me with the fabric to know different people, walks of life. I've always been a winner. I've always been a problem solver and able to get things done. When I graduated high school, I was selected out of 8,000 people, 400 out of 8,000 to attend the United States Coast Guard Academy. 17 years old, I'd spent 21 months there. I got some great training and met some great people. 10 of my classmates went on to become admirals. In fact, the most recent, Linda Fagan, you may have heard about as the commandant, was my classmate, class of 85. Now, at 17 years old, I really didn't appreciate it very much. And I don't think I really liked being told what to do, so I resigned. And I came back home here. I lived in Maryland. I got a degree in biology from the University of Maryland, and I went into work in the biotech field. I had the privilege to work for companies like Boehringer Mannheim, a $3.2 billion company, and handle accounts at 20 couple years old, $1.5 million at the Fort Detrick biochemicals, molecular genetic engineering tools. So I was the one that would come in and help you to take your DNA out, cut it up, glue it back together, and put it back in you. And I was also at the inception of the Human Genome Project. Before you heard of PCR here recently with COVID and all the testing, PCR was a boon to the Human Genome Project because it allowed us to amplify DNA by the millions and millions so we could analyze it, look at it, study it, and that's really been a fruit of so much of the research that you benefit from pharmaceutically wise in the world. So I was there working with people like Dr. Gallo, who was the co-discoverer of HIV, and other people around the NIH, Fort Detrick. Eventually got to work with pharmaceutical companies. I was hired to train PhDs how to be account managers and work with research facilities and pharmaceutical companies. And I really enjoyed working and training PhDs. I helped a company go from $4 million to $20 million in 3 years. And I think that relates to, one, working with people of all different types of walks of life. There are some issues that might be on your mind, especially as far as law enforcement here in the community, and one would be the initiatives with ICE and what we're hearing in the news. Again, we hear a lot of things on the news. Some may be accurate and some may be blown out of proportion and some may not be. But that may be something on your mind, and I think of a balanced person to make decisions, that's worked with a lot of people. For instance, my 6 years of being on the Adams Rescue Mission board and serving as president of that board allowed me to work with a lot of different types of people and appreciate them and serve them. And that, I really believe, gives me a great perspective on a balanced approach to talking to different groups of people that we would have to work with here in the county. And actually, from working in the biotech field, I worked at Montgomery College as environmental safety officer and served. That's a 40,000 student community college in Montgomery County, Maryland. And from there, I actually became a missionary. My family and I were missionaries for 15 years, and that's actually how I met the sheriff. I took a team to Haiti of 10 people after the earthquake in 2010. That was quite an experience. And being a Civil War historian, some of the doctors going down there said, "What do you expect?" And they said, "Expect Gettysburg." And the hospitals were collapsed. The city was basically collapsed. They had tents with amputations and things like that taking place. And we were there to minister to the people that were sick and many dying. That was a life-changing experience. And when I came back, I thought, I really need to get some more training in helping people. And I became a ordained senior law enforcement chaplain. Also got trained in the critical incident stress management, which is for debriefs for people after tragedies. And since then, I've been trained in the crisis intervention team here for the county. And mental health is an issue that we face, and a lot of it is related to some of the exotic and not so exotic drugs that people have gotten introduced to. And it's hard to slice that pie, but I think they're contributory to each other. And that's the kind of thing that the sheriff, having maturity and experience to lead his team of people. See, we are restricted by the legal authority of what we have. We can't become cowboys and go out and think we're doing the best thing. We're guided by the courts, by the court orders, and we need to know the legalities of what we're actually bound to do. That's very critical in something like a PFA. We're going out to uphold the law. We're not trying to represent one party or the other. We want to keep everyone safe, but we have to cross the T's and dot the I's, very particularly with the Act 79 law, which was put into place by Governor Wolf in 2018. So that confidence that we have in knowing the law does help people to understand and I think cooperate a lot better than just trying to use some type of coercion. So my business background, I believe, really has helped me in the sheriff office to do some things to advance it. Over the 12 years that I've been at the sheriff office, and I'd worked from deputy, the warrant team, went to the academy at 50 years old, and became the class president and won the law award there. So I graduated there with honors. And I was promoted to corporal, and I ran the courts, I ran the scheduling for the office. I became the sergeant of operations, oversaw the PFAs, part of the domestic violence task force, and since then I've been promoted to lieutenant of operations. So I've covered not just working as a deputy in all the cases, but also supervising those. And then when you look at the supervising, of course, you have more things like the management aspect, the training, and also progressive discipline and hiring, and even if you have to do so, firing. So I've been involved in a lot of those aspects, but I was able to establish an Outlook calendar management. When I started, they have like a paper calendar on the desk that had the schedules and that type of thing, and a daily scheduling system, so deputies would have a computerized schedule to look at the schedule out through the week or even through the month with the different courts. As I mentioned, I was the first Pennsylvania deputy to attend the CPCMS training to use the electronics and the database. And one thing I did, we started to look at the manpower issues when we're looking at trying to do budgets and such, but we didn't have a way to look at where do we spend our time. So I developed a daily log type of system. So the deputies actually started on paper. They'd fill out how many hours were you in court, how many hours were you out doing civil paperwork. We were able to accumulate that through the year. So at the end of the year, we were able to give a very good estimate of where we were spending our time and where it was being allotted. And that gives us the ability to go to the commissioners, go to the county and say, this is where we're at, this is where we have shortfalls, and we're not just making numbers up. We actually have hard data to look at what we're doing. Maybe, and it really helped out to look at that and see if, in fact, we were robbing Peter to pay Paul. And that has since been computerized since I started with the paper. I actually was the first office taser instructor. I've been the taser instructor for 8 years. In fact, I went to the New York Officer Tactical Association and paid for that myself to become a taser instructor. And I feel it's important to train ourselves, keep ourselves healthy and fit, and it can't always be done by the office. developed PFA protocols and standards. I was able to recently take the property room, which has all those weapons we confiscate. It didn't have a real good organized inventory. I was able to go through and do a thorough inventory and put it into what's called the CODI system. So it's now a computerized inventory system where we actually do barcoding and that kind of thing. Very proud of that. It was a big project. At least a couple hundred weapons in there. But it's a way to do our job with integrity, and we confiscate weapons. We want to maintain those and keep them and make sure people get them back when it's appropriate to do so.
And I apologize for interrupting. I just want to keep us on time. I did promise that there would be opportunity for Q&A, and that only leaves us for about 5 minutes. So if we maybe have one question for the candidate.
You're the one who brought it up, working with ICE. We're reading a lot in the papers these days, and a lot of it doesn't sound right. So even Gettysburg has documented and undocumented immigrants. And we read that ICE comes and without signed warrants to try to arrest them. How would you as a sheriff work with these ICE agents?
It is an important issue, and we have a I don't even like to use the word immigrants, but we have a lot of people in the area that we just really love. So many wonderful families, and I think you really need to start there. You need to start that we're dealing with people, no matter what walk of life or who they are. And now, when you're dealing with ICE, they're a federal organization, and we are basically county. But our role as the sheriff office is kind of like a mini U.S. Marshal group. So we do the same kind of things that they do, but on the county scale. And we have worked with U.S. Marshals in the past. We've had some people that were deputized as U.S. Marshals, and we work with them on some of the higher risk warrants that might be in our county, which thankfully we don't really have a lot of. But we typically have supported the U.S. Marshal on the aspect of the federal. We really haven't had a lot of contact with the ICE organization, especially in this most current. And in the past few years, I don't think we've had very much contact with ICE as far as operating here. But we would provide support for the ICE as we could. Now, some of what they're doing, I understand, is they have detainers for people, not really warrants. We work with a warrant. A warrant is issued by a judge, and that is something we could actually operate with. And I think that one area that we could actually help in the situation, I think there's a challenge to identify people appropriately. When you serve a warrant, one of the most critical things is make sure you have the right person. And you have some people may not have a driver's license, there might not be a photograph on the driver's license, or you might have a similar name for many people. So it can become hard to identify people positively. And I think that we have a fingerprint system in the office. But I think there's other things that could be done to help make sure that the right persons are being addressed or dealt with. And there are ways that you can do a more advanced identification of people. It could be DNA, it could be a facial recognition. And I think that would be important, one, to make sure that the right person, if they're coming out of our county, is going to be identified thoroughly. And I think that the sheriff office may have the capabilities to help do that. We don't have all the equipment now, but that opens up the door to getting money or grants or that type of thing to help that process out. The other thing I think that would do is if someone was positively identified, it would help establish a database for people that maybe shouldn't be coming back into the country if they truly were a criminal. But right now, we have a small interface with ICE. And they've been operating. There's been some issues in the country where ICE was going into a local area, and they apparently were told that they were coming in, and that's a very dangerous type of thing to do. That's something in law enforcement. Maintaining operational security is something we would never want to do, and I think it's kind of hampered the ICE working with local people because it's happened to them already, and maybe they're afraid that word is going to get out and someone could get hurt. So I would say we will support the federal agents like we have with the U.S. Marshals. We're not serving federal warrants, and because that's not our authority. And we'll try to make sure that people are safe, and we'll try to work to see that people are positively identified before anything further is enacted as we can. And I think that's, from my perspective at this point, probably the best thing we could do.
Thank you so much. And these have certainly been difficult but important questions asked and answered. So thank you so much to everyone for your time, and encourage your friends to come out and vote on May 20th or to get a mail-in ballot. So thank you all for being here.
I appreciate the time. I'll just put my website out there. Well, thank you for going on a little journey with me. I do have a website. It's WEGA for Sheriff 2025. We also have a personal security seminar coming up as part of our series we're doing. That's on May 8th in McSherrystown. That's on our website, as well as a fitness challenge on May 3rd. So come out and be healthy with us. Thank you.